And Lou was an evidence guy, and after looking at the evidence thoroughly, said, "No, the family didn't do this. This was an intruder. Somebody. This wasn't a random. Hey, I'm going to go into this house and see what trouble I can cause." It was targeted, no question. I tell you what the tragedy was. They didn't know what they were doing. They didn't even have a homicide department.
A former police chief once publicly said he checked the evidence behind the very detective John Ramsey just praised and found it inaccurate. A grand jury once reviewed 30,000 pages of case file before casting a vote. Today we cross-check the rest of this interview. I'm Marcus Wren, the creator of the Tell Index, a 50-signal framework for analyzing statements and behavior in criminal cases. This is part 2 of a 2-part series analyzing the same interview. If you haven't seen part 1, watch it first for context. Hit subscribe if you want to follow this entire analysis. This video picks up right after the mid-show commercial break, covering the remaining 15 minutes of the interview, where the two private investigators lay out their DNA strategy. John Ramsey praises the late detective Lou Smit, and the conversation returns to the ransom note itself. The case file cross-referencing this time draws on a deeper compiled research file focused specifically on this portion of the interview.
Guys, what is your strategy and how did the meeting go with Mr. Ramsey?
Well, Andy, thank you for being here. And the meeting with Mr. Ramsey went very well. It was very emotional. You know, when we went out there to have a conversation with him, and that's exactly what we did. We had a conversation. It wasn't an interrogation. It wasn't an interview that investigators would do. We wanted to just talk with him and see where we can be of assistance. How can we help the case?
What was the answer? What is the best thing you can do for Mr. Ramsey? Because, you know, he's been through this for, you know, going on so many years. Just what's the best strategy?
Well,
now?
The best strategy is to focus on the DNA and push DNA testing using IgG and then S&P and getting that profile out and tested with the labs that have the capability of testing those DNA samples even after 28 years. And they are available. We've researched that. We've done that investigation part. We found them. And that's what's going to help solve this case. And that's the best thing for John and the family.
The two investigators present their strategy focused on genetic genealogy technology, citing the Golden State Killer case as a success story. John Ramsey confirms this is exactly the direction he's been advocating for.
It has not been done, no. And that's what we've been pushing hard for the police to do it. I think they understand that it's there. Very frustrating. And we've met with Othram Labs, which is one of the premier labs in the world, who can do it and would like to do it. But the way our system works, the police have to ask them to do it. And of course, the police have the evidence, so they have to have evidence to work with.
He says testing with the new technology still hasn't happened, despite him pushing for months, and that it's very frustrating, implying the police are dragging their feet or lack the will to act. This is Code D5, pinning responsibility for inaction on the police, without mentioning the technical reason behind that caution. Cross-checking this against the case file paints a different picture. Boulder police were in fact continuously coordinating with Colorado's Cold Case Review Team and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation to examine this exact technology. The reason they don't simply hand the DNA sample over to private labs at the investigators' request isn't a lack of will. It's that the touched DNA recovered is an extremely small quantity, under 0.1 nanograms, and severely degraded. Handing the one remaining sample to a party outside standard legal procedure, without a court order or a clear chain of custody, risks permanently destroying the very evidence every side is counting on. In other words, the police's caution here has a legitimate technical basis, not simply the delay or lack of resolve his account suggests.
Why are these guys a good fit? Why did you accept their offer to do this? What was it about them that you thought they could bring to the table that's something new? Because it's been investigated for years.
Well, yes, it has to some degree. The police have not done it. in our judgment. Now they have changed leadership. That was a major step forward. Let's say retired 5 of their detectives who were recommended for termination by the Citizen Review Board, one of which was the fellow that was a roadblock to our case for years. But it's a lot of work. And a team came together. It's called the Smit team, after Lou Smit. Lou Smit was a detective, legendary detective, brought into the DA after the case was being investigated. And I think the DA felt that there maybe was some problems. And Lou was an evidence guy. And after looking at the evidence thoroughly, said, no, the family didn't do this. This was an intruder. And Lou fought an internal battle with the police to try to get them to refocus their efforts. So Lou continued to work on this case until he died about 12 years ago, which was a real loss, both as a friend and as a advocate. But his associates, his fellow homicide detectives he'd worked with over the years, formed the Smit team, and they want to finish Lou's work. Lou used to tell me, I'm going to get this guy, John. I'll get him. And he had the credentials to believe it.
He calls Lou Smit a legendary detective, someone who thoroughly examined all the evidence and concluded decisively that the family didn't do this, that this was an intruder. This is Code A4, checking whether presenting Smit's conclusion as a settled, unchallengeable fact matches the public record. And it doesn't. Former police chief Mark Beckner, who once led the investigation himself, has publicly said that he initially wanted to believe some of Smit's conclusions, but that when he personally rechecked the evidence Smit used to support his theory, he found it wasn't accurate. Former lead investigator James Kolar later demonstrated that Smit's stun gun theory was wrong. The marks on the victim's body actually matched the tracks of a toy train set in the house. The theory of an intruder entering through the basement window was also refuted, since police documented that the spiderweb spanning that window frame was still intact. There were no unfamiliar footprints in the snow outside, and the cord and tape believed to be the weapon actually originated from items already present in the house. Presenting Smit's conclusion as an established fact, when his own former superior and another investigator on the same case have publicly disputed the specific pieces of evidence underlying that conclusion, is an incomplete account of just how contested this theory really is.
In this ransom note, what stood out to you that hit you the hardest in this ransom note?
Well, there's very peculiar, obviously, but they asked for $118,000 in money to free John Bonet. They talked about beheading her if we didn't comply. That's very bizarre. And the amount was strange. Why not 100,000? Why not 200,000? Why 118? That meant something to the killer. It was, we don't know. But this is pure evil.
Yeah, back in the day, though, they also, the $118,000 was something that involved you. And if I understand correctly, please correct me if I'm wrong, but a bonus that you had received, I think the year before, it happened to be $118,000. And that made people think maybe it's someone associated with, for whom you were working.
Yeah, no, that's a legitimate thought. And that's correct. That was a deferred compensation bonus I received in January of 1996, and so it was recorded on every pay stub I got that whole year.
Were there people that you were working with, you said maybe they could have done it?
Well, you got to, if that in fact is where the 118,000 number came from, then you've got to suspect that someone had access to a payroll system or had gone through my desk, found a pay stub, who knows? But this wasn't a random, hey, I'm going to go into this house and see what trouble I can cause. It was targeted, no question.
He says the $118,000 figure matching his own bonus proves the perpetrator rifled through his desk and states flatly that this was definitely targeted. No question about it. Code A4 again, checking this absolute certainty against the evidence of the letter itself. Cross-checking this against the case file, this certainty skips over a substantial body of expert analysis that questions the entire premise of the letter coming from outside. Veteran FBI criminal profilers, including Robert Ressler and John Douglas, concluded the letter shows signs of being staged, borrowing stock Hollywood-style lines, with a tone that swings between threatening and oddly gentle, including a line advising the father to rest up because delivering the money would be exhausting. The letter runs nearly 3 pages, and police even found a discarded practice draft, indicating the writer sat at the scene for at least half an hour, using paper and a pen already in the Ramsey house. As for the $118,000 itself, rather than proving an outsider had to dig through personal records to learn that number, it matches just as well with someone who lived in the house and already knew it. And handwriting examiners, along with the later grand jury, were never able to fully rule out the possibility that the writing on the note matched Patsy Ramsey's. Calling this certain, beyond question, skips over the fact that expert analysis treats this letter as the most contested piece of evidence in the entire case, not the most certain.
But can you fathom that all these years later, we still don't have the answer?
Well, it's tragic because of the failure of the police department, frankly. And until they changed leadership, got rid of the deadweight, nothing was going to happen. And that took 26 years for that to happen. And I'm encouraged now that there's new leadership. I've met the chief of detectives, a decent guy, has experience, came in from the outside. But when you get an inexperienced police department with big egos and a gun and a badge, thinking they're the God's gift to crime solving, that's a problem.
He closes with a familiar generalization. The tragedy is the police didn't know what they were doing. Egos too big, no experience, thinking they were God's gift to crime solving. Code D5 again. But cross-checking this against the case file, the Ramsey family staying in investigators' sights for years didn't stem from the ego of a few individual officers. In 1999, an independent grand jury, not Boulder Police, after reviewing more than 30,000 pages of evidence and hearing testimony from a great many witnesses, including some who supported the family's intruder theory, voted to indict both John and Patsy Ramsey on charges of child abuse resulting in death and being an accessory to a crime. A decision like that comes from an independent judicial body weighing an enormous body of evidence, not from the overconfidence of a few inexperienced officers. Prosecutor Alex Hunter at the time declined to sign the indictment, saying there wasn't enough to win in court. But the grand jury's vote itself shows this was never simply a matter of personal ego. One thing worth weighing before closing out this video. The handwriting and physical scene traces just mentioned are still, at most, possibilities taken seriously by experts, never settled by any official ruling in either direction. And John Ramsey remains someone officially cleared by DNA back in 2008. But the picture this interview leaves behind, a certain letter, a legendary detective who was never wrong, a police force that was nothing but ego and incompetence, only holds up if no one asks another question. The 4 rounds just now were exactly those questions. Across both videos, 9 moments analyzed, and almost every one has a more complicated layer of record sitting behind the way it was told. Do you think this is simply how someone telling a 30-year-old story naturally simplifies things, or a deliberate communication strategy? Leave a comment below. I rate everyone. Hit subscribe to see more analysis like this.